Right after the gas leak forced us out of our home, my family said I could stay, then looked at my 5-year-old daughter and told her she wasn't really family. That moment broke something in me I can't ever fix. I'm Ava, 33, and what happened next changed the way I understand love, loyalty, and blood ties. So let me ask you, if someone said your child didn't belong in your own family, how would you respond? Share your thoughts below. I truly want to hear what you'd do. I never imagined a faint metallic smell could change the entire course of my life. Yet there it was, drifting through the quiet of my little apartment on a cold, wet November night in Tacoma. I was tucking Mia under her blanket, smoothing the corner where she always placed her tiny sketchbook, when the air shifted. It wasn't dramatic, just a whisper of something sharp and wrong, like rust mixed with spoiled fruit. I stood still for a moment, listening. The building was usually silent at this hour. Most of my neighbors turned in early during these long, rain-soaked evenings. Mia looked up at me with those round, curious eyes, a pencil still tucked behind her ear. "Mommy, is the house sick?" she asked. Her question hit me harder than the smell itself. I tried turning on the stove, more out of habit than logic. The knob clicked, but no flame. Only that faint odor pressing against the back of my throat. Before I could decide what to do next, a heavy knock rattled the door. I opened it to find Mr. Dwyer, my elderly neighbor who always wore slippers no matter the weather, standing in the hallway, raincoat half-zipped. "Ava, sweetheart," he said, breathless. "Get the little one and head outside. The firefighters are checking a gas issue. Don't wait around." Gas. That one word dropped straight into my stomach. I grabbed Mia's jacket, her sketchbook, and my phone. The hallway lights flickered as we stepped out, and the air smelled even stranger, thicker. We joined a handful of neighbors shuffling toward the exit, everyone unsettled but quiet. People tend to whisper during emergencies, as if volume itself might make things worse. The moment we stepped outside, cold rain tapped against our faces. Tacoma rain has a way of making everything feel heavier, like the sky is asking you to carry just a bit more weight. Firefighters moved briskly around the building, equipment glinting under the streetlights. One of them guided us toward the sidewalk. Mia pressed herself into my coat, her breath warm against my side. She wasn't crying, she rarely did, but she kept looking back at the apartment windows, as though she expected her drawings taped on the fridge to wave goodbye. It didn't take long for the inspector to confirm what everyone already suspected. Gas leak, serious enough to evacuate the building. He walked over to me with a clipboard tucked under one arm and rain dripping from the brim of his helmet. "You can't go back in tonight," he told me. "Maybe not tomorrow either. Depends on when maintenance gets here." I nodded, but my mind was already spinning ahead. Work, childcare, the few savings I'd put aside for emergencies, suddenly feeling paper thin. Mia didn't understand the logistics. She just clung to my sleeve as though I might slip away. We stood there for nearly an hour while the crews worked. Eventually, the inspector placed a red tag on the entrance, unsafe until further notice. The kind of tag that makes your stomach drop even if you'd prepared for everything else in life. I made a couple of calls to emergency maintenance, straight to voicemail. I tried again, hoping a different tone might magically answer. Nothing. So I did the only thing left to do, walked Mia to the budget motel a few blocks away. The clerk barely looked up as he handed me the key card. The room smelled faintly of bleach. The microwave hummed louder than necessary, and the blanket on the bed was thin enough for the lamplight to pass through. Still, Mia hopped onto the mattress with a soft thump and flipped open her sketchbook. She drew 2 crooked dinosaurs holding hands, her favorite comfort doodle. I sat on the edge of the bed, peeling off my damp socks and trying to ignore the ache between my shoulders. For breakfast the next morning, we split a couple of stale cereal boxes from the motel lobby. The rain had slowed, but the sky was still the color of wet concrete. Mia swung her legs under the small table and looked up at me. "Does Grandma know I like dinosaur shows?" she asked. I hesitated, a simple question, yet something in it pressed on the part of my chest that always tightened when family came up. I'd never hidden Mia from them. They just never made room for her. Still, I forced a small smile. "We'll tell her," I said, though the words felt fragile. Mia nodded and kept drawing little scales on her dinosaurs. Children have a way of trusting that adults have the answers, or at least a plan. I wished I had either. When I stepped outside to get better cell service, the air was sharp with morning cold. My apartment was unlivable for days, maybe longer. There were no more calls I could make, no quick fixes left. I stood on the damp concrete walkway, Mia's tiny hand slipping into mine, her fingers warm and sure in a way mine weren't. I looked down at her. She smiled, soft and tired. And with nowhere else to go, I dialed my mother's number. By late morning, the rain had thinned into a light mist, just enough to blur the windshield but not enough to hide how tired I looked in the reflection. Mia had fallen asleep in the back seat, her cheek pressed against her sketchbook. For a moment, I watched her tiny breaths fog the window and wished I could freeze time right there, before the day shifted into something neither of us was ready for. My parents' house in Spokane appeared exactly the way I remembered it. Trimmed hedges, wreath already hanging on the door, pumpkins still on the porch because my mother liked to keep them seasonal as long as possible. It was the kind of suburban scene people put on postcards, warm and tidy and deceptively gentle. I carried our overnight bag as Mia slid her hand into mine. She was still groggy, blinking at the holiday decorations like she wasn't sure if they were real. I gave her a small smile, even though my stomach was tightening with every step toward the porch. When I knocked, the door opened quicker than I expected. It was Dad. His eyes softened for a beat when he saw me, but the moment he spotted Mia behind my leg, something in his expression faltered, like he'd walked into a surprise he wished he had time to prepare for. "Oh," he said, holding onto the doorknob. "I thought you were coming alone." The words weren't sharp, but they cut cleanly. Before I could respond, Mom's voice floated from deeper inside the house, bright and expectant. "Ava, just you, right?" I stepped forward, guiding Mia in front of me so they could see her clearly. Mom appeared in the entryway, smoothing her sweater like she was about to greet company she wasn't sure she'd invited. Her eyes landed on Mia and paused. Not in surprise. My mother didn't surprise easily. It was calculation. A quick assessment before deciding how she wanted to feel. "Oh," she said, echoing Dad but with a smaller smile. "You brought her." Mia looked up, uncertain if her meant something bad. I squeezed her hand gently. Inside, everything felt warmer than the air outside, but not for us. Emily's kids were already running around the living room, chasing each other between the couch and the coffee table where a half-finished craft project was spread out. Emily herself was perched on the armchair, scrolling on her phone, her hair curled the way she did for pictures she planned to post later. "Ava?" she called, lifting her chin but not getting up. "Wow, long drive, huh?" Then she saw Mia. The smile stayed, but only on her lips, not in her eyes. "Well, hello, little one." Mia waved politely. Emily didn't wave back. At the dining table, an extra chair had been pulled up for me, pillow on the seat and everything. But there was no chair for Mia. Mom gestured casually. "We weren't expecting a child. You didn't mention bringing her, so we didn't prepare a room or anything." I kept my voice even. "She's 5. I can't exactly leave her somewhere." Mom nodded in that slow, polite way she used when she wanted to appear reasonable. "Of course, I understand. It's just the guest room is set up for one, and the house is already full with the kids and all." Emily chimed in, crossing one leg over the other as if she were offering helpful commentary. "You know how it is, Ava. You can't expect everyone to treat her like a Morgan. That's not how family works." The word "her" landed heavier the second time. So did the phrase "like a Morgan." Mia shifted closer to me, fingers curling around the fabric of my sleeve. I brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and pretended not to notice the heat rising in my face. We moved into the kitchen, where Mom was slicing pumpkin pie. The scent filled the air, warm spices, buttery crust, the kind of smell that used to mean holidays and comfort. She placed plates in front of Emily's kids, one by one. First slice, second slice, third slice. Each piece cut precisely, like a practiced ritual. She didn't look toward Mia. Not once. Mia watched quietly, her fingers tracing invisible shapes on the table. She wasn't a child who demanded things. She just observed, taking the world in with a softness that made moments like this far sharper. When Mom finally glanced our way, it wasn't with a plate. It was with a question. "Are you planning to stay long? I just need to know how to arrange everything." Before I could answer, Mia whispered, barely audible, "Maybe dessert is only for real cousins." I felt something in me fold inward. I reached for her hand. "Sweetheart, everyone gets dessert. Maybe Grandma just—" But my voice cracked, betraying the lie. Mia didn't argue. She simply leaned her head against my arm. Dad walked by, giving a small, uncomfortable smile. He patted Mia's shoulder once, gently but quickly, as though affection needed to be rationed carefully. The room buzzed with conversation that somehow excluded us without anyone explicitly trying. Controlled cruelty has a way of blending into the wallpaper. After a while, I told Mom we were going to step outside for some fresh air. She nodded, relieved rather than concerned. I walked Mia to the front steps and sat beside her. The cold came instantly through the denim of my jeans. She rested her head on my shoulder, the morning sun barely making it through the gray clouds. "I thought Grandma would be happy we came," she murmured. I swallowed hard. I thought so too. In that quiet moment, just me, Mia, and the distant hum of a leaf blower down the street, I realized something with a clarity I hadn't allowed myself before. There was no place for her in that house. And if there was no place for her, then there was no place for me either. We sat there until her small hands stopped fidgeting. When we finally walked back inside, Mom met us near the hallway. She folded her arms gently, as though preparing to offer hospitality with conditions. "Ava," she said, "we can set up the guest room for you, but we're not prepared to host your choice." It was said with a smile, and it hurt more because of that. Families aren't always broken by accidents. Sometimes they break on purpose. Standing in my parents' hallway with our overnight bag at my feet, I finally let that thought in. Mom had just told me they could set up the guest room for me, but they weren't prepared to host my daughter. She said it gently, like she was offering a reasonable compromise, not drawing a hard line through a 5-year-old child. I went back to the guest room where Mia sat on the edge of the bed, her sneakers still on, sketchbook open on her lap. She was drawing the front of the house, adding little square windows with careful strokes. "Are we staying here now?" she asked. "For a little bit," I said, sitting beside her. Her pencil paused. "Do they like having us here?" A memory rose up, sharp and unwelcome. A birthday from years ago. Emily's friends crowded around our kitchen table. Mom cut slices of cake, thick frosting, extra sprinkles. When she got to me, the tray was empty. "There's fruit in the fridge," she'd said. "It's better for you anyway." That same tight feeling pulled across my chest now. I smoothed Mia's hair. "Get some rest, sweetheart. I'll be right back." Once she lay down, I pulled the blanket over her and watched her eyes flutter closed. The guest room was pretty in the way magazine pages are pretty. Color-coordinated pillows, a scented candle on the dresser, nothing out of place. It didn't feel like it had ever really been meant for me, and it certainly hadn't been meant for her. I packed our bag again, folding clothes that barely had time to wrinkle. In the hallway, Emily leaned against the wall, scrolling on her phone. "You're already leaving?" she asked. "We are," I answered. She tilted her head. "You're taking this really seriously, you know. Mom is trying." "Trying to do what?" "To adjust," she said. "This isn't what she pictured. You can't expect everyone to treat your kid like she's family?" I finished. Emily gave a small, humorless laugh and went back to her screen. "Next time, just give us a heads up." Next time, as if this had been a scheduling conflict and not a question of whether my child counted. Dad walked by then, eyes sliding from me to the bag. "Long drive," he murmured. "Yeah," I said, "and it's not over yet." Mom appeared at the end of the hall, hands rubbing absently at her elbows. "If you go now, at least text when you get there," she said. "And next time, please tell us your plans. It's hard to rearrange things." I didn't bother asking what things meant. The house, the routine, the version of our family where Mia didn't exist. In the guest room, I lifted Mia into my arms. She stirred, mumbling something about dinosaurs, then settled against my shoulder. Her sketchbook slid onto the bed. I picked it up with my free hand and held it to my chest. No one stopped us at the front door. I closed it softly behind me. It sounded a lot like a choice being made, just not by me. The motel room that night looked like every other cheap room I'd ever stayed in. Patterned bedspread, buzzing light, air that smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet. Mia curled into my side the moment we lay down, her hand gripping the front of my t-shirt like she was afraid I might float away. She fell asleep quickly. I didn't. I stared at a thin crack in the ceiling, following it from one corner to the other. It reminded me of the crack in the hallway wall of the house where I grew up. As a kid, I used to trace it with my finger every time I walked past, as if maybe I could smooth it away. Some breaks never show on the outside. Others are right there in the plaster. My mind drifted back further, past cake and Christmas mornings, to the day I first met Mia in a quiet room at a foster agency. A serious little girl with a crooked ponytail and a piece of paper clutched in both hands. She'd drawn 2 stick figures, one labeled me, the other blank. She'd held it out without a word. I'd written Mom under the empty one. That was the day I decided who my family was. Not the day my parents approved, not the day anyone else agreed. Just mine. I turned onto my side to look at her now. Her brow was furrowed even in sleep, as if she expected to be moved again. I smoothed it with my thumb. "No more," I whispered, mostly to myself. "No more begging for space." Morning came early and gray. Mia blinked awake, then smiled when she realized we were still together. "Are we going back to Grandma's?" she asked. "Not today," I said gently. She seemed to think about that, then quietly picked up her sketchbook and began a new drawing. This house had a big front door and a wide, steady roof. While she worked, I sat at the small motel desk and opened my banking app. One recurring transfer glowed on the screen. $200 a month, sent automatically to my parents for house upkeep. I'd started it 12 years earlier when I first moved out, part guilt, part hope that money might buy me a steadier place in the family. My thumb hovered over the option to cancel. Mom's words replayed in my head. "We're not prepared to host your choice." If there was no room in that house for my daughter, there was no reason for my money to live there either. I tapped cancel. The confirmation appeared, simple and clean. Something inside me loosened. It felt like cutting a thin, invisible rope I'd been dragging for miles. A little later, I stepped outside to get better reception and dialed Simone. The cold air woke me up more than the motel coffee had. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, you hanging in there?" "Sort of," I said. "My place is shut down, my parents don't have space for Mia, and I just divorced myself from their mortgage." Simone didn't hesitate. "Drive here," she said. "Today. I have room for both of you." Sometimes grace sounds exactly like that. Simple, steady, no conditions attached. By the afternoon, I was pulling up in front of her townhouse. It wasn't big or fancy. The front steps needed repainting. A kid's bike lay on its side near the walkway. Still, as soon as I saw the porch light on, my chest eased. Simone opened the door with a dish towel over her shoulder and a smile that reached all the way to her eyes. "You're here," she said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. She bent down to Mia's height. "And you must be Mia. We've got a room ready. Want to see it?" Mia looked up at me for permission. I nodded. Olivia appeared behind Simone, socked feet sliding a little on the floor. "I saved some markers for you," she told Mia, "and we can share the big pillow." For the first time in days, Mia's whole face lit up. She stepped forward, slipping her hand into Olivia's, and the 2 girls disappeared down the hallway in a tumble of small footsteps and soft laughter. I stayed in the doorway a moment longer, just breathing. Later that evening, when the girls were settled with coloring books in the living room and Simone had poured me a mug of tea at her kitchen table, I opened my laptop. The search bar waited, blank. My fingers hovered over the keys before I typed, slow and deliberate. "Real estate lawyer near me." Names and phone numbers filled the screen. I scrolled, heart beating a little faster as I went. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the ground under my feet and under Mia's. Simone leaned over my shoulder. "Whatever you decide," she said quietly, "you're not doing it alone." I clicked on one listing, read the short biography of a lawyer who handled property disputes, and found the contact button. My cursor hovered over the call icon for a long breath. For the first time, I wasn't weighing what my parents would think. I was weighing what my daughter deserved. Then I pressed my finger down. I used to believe the worst thing my family had ever done was tell my daughter she didn't belong. But as January settled cold and gray over Tacoma, I learned they had crossed that line long before Mia ever existed. Quietly, in ink, behind my back. The morning started calm enough. Mia and I sat in a small coffee shop downtown, the kind with fogged windows and the smell of roasted beans sinking into your clothes. She drew quietly with her crayons, legs swinging under the little table. I watched her sketch a row of houses with cheerful doors and curved rooftops, Homes that looked safe and steady, nothing like the ones we'd been drifting between. Simone had suggested the coffee shop as a meeting spot before my appointment with the attorney. "It'll feel less intimidating," she'd said, and she wasn't wrong. Still, nerves hummed beneath my skin. I reached into my bag and pulled out the old deed documents I'd taken from my file box, papers proving my 1/3 ownership in the house I grew up in. I had never imagined they'd be anything but symbolic, a dusty inheritance, something to forget in a drawer. Now they felt like the hinge of a door I was finally ready to open. Simone arrived just as Mia added a sun to her drawing. She slid into the seat across from me, her coat still dusted with rain. "You ready?" she asked softly. "No," I said, managing a half smile, "but I'm going anyway." "That counts." We finished our drinks, gathered Mia's crayons, and walked 2 blocks to a brick building with frosted glass windows. The brass letters on the door read, "Franklin and Ward, Real Estate Law." It looked professional, predictable, nothing like the emotional mess spiraling in my chest. Inside, Helen Franklin greeted us herself. She was in her 50s, steady-eyed, wearing a deep blue blazer that made her presence feel both calm and immovable. She shook my hand firmly, then bent down slightly to say hello to Mia, who shyly lifted her drawing in response. "That's lovely," Helen said, smiling. "You're welcome to sit right there and keep coloring while your mom and I talk." Mia nodded and settled at a small side table, crayons already arranged in her favorite rainbow order. I took a seat across from Helen as she opened a folder and gestured for my documents. "So," she began, "you said you're listed as a 1/3 owner. Let's start with that." She read through the papers with the kind of focus that made me sit a little straighter. Outside, cars passed through puddles left from last night's rain, but in the office, everything was quiet except for the soft scratch of her pen. Halfway through the stack, she stopped. Her brow lowered. Not dramatically, just enough for my breath to catch. "Ava," she said slowly, "did you sign a refinance on your parents' home in 2016? I blinked. "No, I've never signed anything except the original inheritance paperwork." Helen didn't respond immediately. She simply turned a document toward me. Slowly, deliberately, like she knew the moment would land hard. There it was. My printed name. My supposed signature. The date, June 2016. The lines looping across the page looked confident, practiced, and absolutely nothing like my handwriting. A chill crawled up my spine. "That's not mine," I whispered. Helen nodded once, not surprised, more like she'd already suspected as much. "I thought so. The pen pressure, slant, and spacing are inconsistent with the documents you did sign." My stomach twisted. The room felt smaller. Mia looked up from her drawing then, sensing something. Her crayon paused mid-stroke. "Mommy?" she whispered. "Are you okay?" I forced a breath, then a smile. "Yes, honey, I'm okay." My hands, however, trembled slightly on the edge of the desk. Helen waited until Mia returned to her drawing before she spoke again, her tone steady and professional. "What you're looking at," she said, tapping the signature line, "is forgery. Whoever submitted this document used your legal share as collateral for a refinance loan." I closed my eyes for a moment. All those years, my parents insisting they had handled the finances, reassuring me everything was taken care of. All those hints Mom dropped. "You'll never understand how much we've done for you." I always assumed it meant emotional support, sacrifices I somehow failed to appreciate. Now I understood the darker truth. They had taken something that belonged to me because they assumed I wouldn't question it, because I had always been the one who didn't make trouble. When I opened my eyes again, Helen had already slid a clean sheet of paper toward me, her notes outlining possible next steps. "Here are your options," she said, folding her hands. "First, file a civil claim against the co-owners for fraud. Second, petition the court to force a sale of the property. Third, notify the lender. That often triggers an internal investigation, sometimes criminal, sometimes financial." Each sentence landed like a stone, building a small wall in front of me, a wall I'd have to climb. "What happens if I do nothing?" I asked quietly. Helen looked at me with a kind sympathy that didn't turn patronizing. "Then the house remains tied to a loan you never agreed to, and if payments stop, the lender could pursue all listed owners, including you." The room fell silent. Across from us, Mia had drawn a new picture, 2 houses side by side. One had a cracked wall. The other had a bright, wide doorway. I felt something steady inside me click into place. I want to move forward, I said, my voice softer than I expected. Whatever needs to happen next, let's start it. Helen didn't smile, but her nod held approval. She pulled a form from her drawer and set it in front of me. This authorizes me to act on your behalf. Once you sign, we begin. My hand still shook a little, but the pen felt firm between my fingers as I wrote my name. My actual handwriting this time. With one signature, I placed everything in motion. No turning back now. That night, after Mia had fallen asleep in the warm guest room at Simone's and the house was quiet except for the hum of the heater, my phone buzzed. Voicemail. From Mom. Her voice crackled through the speaker, tight, controlled, almost trembling. Ava, whatever you're doing, stop. You have no idea what you're starting. The message ended without goodbye. I stared at the phone for a long time, the silence around me thick and unbroken. Maybe she was right. Maybe I didn't fully understand what I was starting. But for the first time, I knew exactly why I was doing it. Every family has a breaking point. Mine arrived on a warm June morning, inside a courthouse with gray floors, flickering overhead lights, and a kind of hush that made every footstep feel louder than it should. Simone had driven with us from Tacoma to Spokane, so I wouldn't have to walk into the courthouse alone. Mia held her hand as we crossed the parking lot. Her small backpack bounced against her shoulders with each step. She wasn't allowed inside the courtroom, so Simone planned to sit with her in the waiting area. Before I walked through the heavy doors, Mia tugged on my sleeve. "Will it be okay, Mommy?" she asked. I bent down and kissed her forehead. "It will. You just stay with Simone and I'll come find you when it's done." She nodded bravely, though I could see the worry in her eyes. Inside the courthouse lobby, the air smelled like old paper and disinfectant. People sat in rows of benches, murmuring quietly, waiting for their hearings. When I reached the corridor outside courtroom 3B, I spotted them, my parents and Emily, sitting together on a bench, huddled like a single unit. Emily stared at her phone, but I could tell she sensed me. Mom sat upright, hands folded tightly in her lap, shoulders stiff with determination. Dad looked exhausted, eyelids heavy, jaw slack like he hadn't slept in days. Mom finally lifted her head. "Ava," she said, polite but cold. "Mom." I kept my voice even. Emily didn't bother looking up. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. Dad gave a small nod in my direction, something between greeting and apology. Mostly apology. Helen arrived moments later, brisk and steady. "Ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be." When the clerk opened the courtroom doors, we filed inside. The judge's bench loomed above us, simple wood polished with age. Judge Albright was already seated. White hair, square glasses, expression like stone softened by experience. He called our case, and the hearing began. Helen started by laying out the basic facts. My 1/3 ownership, the refinance paperwork, the signature that wasn't mine. She spoke calmly, each point measured, each document handed to the clerk with quiet confidence. Mom was the first to respond. "We have supported Ava her entire life," she said, voice quivering with restrained indignation. "We handled finances because she was overwhelmed. We thought we were helping." Judge Albright nodded but didn't react. "And did you inform her of the refinance at any point?" Mom hesitated too long. "We discussed it, briefly." I felt Helen sit up straighter. "Your Honor, there is no record of such communication, and Ms. Morgan confirms she never received notice." Emily leaned forward, arms crossed. "She abandoned the family for a child who isn't blood. She doesn't get to come back years later and tear our lives apart." There it was, the line that had hovered beneath everything since the night they refused Mia. Hearing it out loud felt like a slap made of words. Judge Albright adjusted his glasses. "That statement is not relevant to the legal matter before us," he said sharply. But it was relevant to me. When the judge asked if I wanted to speak, I stood. My palms were damp, but I kept my voice steady. "I grew up in that house," I began. "I loved it. But I also learned very young that love wasn't divided equally. My sister was the one everyone made room for. I learned to take whatever space was left." I glanced briefly at Mom. She looked away. "I didn't complain. I didn't argue. Even when I left for college, I kept giving back. For 12 years, I paid upkeep on the house because I believed we were a family that took care of each other." I took a breath. "And then last fall, when I needed help, just a few nights, My parents told me they didn't have space for my daughter. They told me she wasn't really family. Emily scoffed, but Mom's face tightened. I never would have imagined they'd use my name on a loan I never signed, I continued, that they'd put me at financial risk without telling me. I didn't come here for revenge. I came here because I deserve the truth, and because my daughter deserves better than the cycle I grew up in. The courtroom went still. Mom suddenly rose to her feet as if something inside her snapped. "Mia isn't our real granddaughter," she shouted before catching herself. "Ava forced her on us. We weren't ready for that responsibility." Dad buried his face in his hands. Emily looked horrified, not at what was said, but that it had slipped out unfiltered. Judge Albright waited for silence before speaking. When he finally did, his voice filled the room with firm finality. "I've reviewed the evidence," he said, tapping the forged document. "The signature attributed to Ms. Morgan is inconsistent with her verified handwriting. The loan was obtained without her knowledge or consent. That constitutes fraudulent execution." Mom inhaled sharply. "Therefore," he continued, "full repayment of the refinance loan is required. Additionally, the Spokane property will be sold under court supervision, and proceeds divided according to original ownership. Ms. Morgan's 1/3 portion remains intact." Emily gasped audibly. Dad rubbed his forehead with both hands. Mom looked stunned, then furious. The gavel dropped softly, like the final note of a song that had been playing for years. The hearing ended and people began filing out. Helen touched my elbow lightly. "Well done," she said. I nodded, though my legs felt unsteady. "Thank you." Outside the courtroom, the hallway hummed with activity, doors opening, voices echoing, heels tapping across the tile. I spotted Simone down the corridor with Mia, who ran to me the moment she saw me. "Mommy," she said, wrapping her arms around my waist. I lifted her and kissed the top of her head. "I'm here," I whispered. "Everything's okay." As I lowered her back down, Mom approached. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes burned with something sharp. She leaned close, too close, and spoke through clenched teeth so only I could hear. "You chose her over us. Don't expect a family when this is over." I didn't flinch. For once in my life, her words didn't sink. They fell away. I took Mia's hand, turned toward Simone, and walked down the hallway without looking back. Some doors don't need to be slammed to close. Some close with the soft certainty of truth that can't lie anymore. There are endings that break you apart, and endings that quietly put you back together. Mine managed to do both. By February 2024, winter in Tacoma carried that watery kind of light, thin, cold, but hopeful in its own way. One morning, while Mia sat at the kitchen table eating cereal shaped like tiny stars, my phone buzzed with a message from Helen. "Funds have arrived. The transfer is complete." I stared at the screen, letting the words settle. For months, the legal process had moved slowly, like wading through thick mud. Now, suddenly, it was over. The Spokane house, my old house, had finally sold. The fraudulent loan had been paid off, and just like Helen promised, my 1/3 share had arrived untouched, sitting in my account as if it had always belonged there. I set the phone down, not trusting myself to move too quickly. That money wasn't just a deposit. It was the truth finally coming to the surface after years of being buried under family expectations and quiet obligations. It was the first thing my parents couldn't twist or guilt me out of. It was mine, and it meant Mia and I could finally breathe. A few days later, I stood in my living room as workers finished the last repairs on the house. The new floors felt warm under my feet. The walls had fresh paint, soft yellow in the hallway, a calm gray in the living room. The foundation had been leveled so the floors no longer slanted. Nothing creaked. Nothing shifted. For the first time since moving in, the house felt genuinely whole. Mia came running in from the kitchen, holding a new drawing. "Mommy, look!" She'd drawn another house, but this one was different from the old ones she used to make. No crooked windows, no cracked walls, just steady lines and a big door filled in with bright orange. "This house doesn't move," she said proudly. "It stays right where it's supposed to." Her words hit something deep in me. I hung her drawing on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a tiny apple and kissed the top of her head. "We stay right where we're supposed to, too," I told her. March rolled in with early spring rain showers. Simone and Olivia became regular fixtures in our home, dropping by with leftovers, sharing coloring books, sometimes curling up on the couch with us to watch old nature documentaries. They didn't ask for anything. They didn't measure what they gave. They just showed up. That was a kind of love I wasn't used to, but one I was learning to trust. One afternoon, while sorting a stack of renovation receipts and bank documents, a text appeared on my phone. It was from my mother. "We lost everything because of you." No greeting, no attempt at understanding, just a pointed accusation, familiar in tone, shaped to land where it would once have hurt me most. But something inside me had shifted. The text didn't make my stomach twist or my pulse quicken. It felt like an echo from a room I had already stepped out of. I deleted it without replying. Later that evening, as I put away folded towels in the linen closet, Mia appeared beside me with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. "Mommy," she asked softly, "are we done moving now?" I knelt down so we were face to face and brushed a curl from her forehead. "Yeah, baby, we're done. This is our home now. No more packing, no more wondering." She nodded with a seriousness only a 5-year-old could muster, then hugged me tightly. Spring came early that year. By April, the trees along our street wore small green buds, and the air smelled faintly of damp grass and new beginnings. On a quiet Saturday morning, Simone brought Olivia over, and the girls took their sidewalk chalk outside. They knelt on the concrete, drawing houses in every color they could find: pink roofs, blue doors, tall windows, tiny gardens. When I stepped outside with a mug of tea, I found Mia carefully outlining a house bigger than all the others. She pressed the chalk so firmly that colored dust gathered on her fingertips. "This one is ours," she whispered when she noticed me. "The big one, the one that stays." I stood there watching her, the sun warming my shoulders, and felt something settle inside me, a sense of belonging I had chased most of my life without knowing how to name it. We didn't need permission anymore. We didn't need the kind of family that loved in conditions and fine print. We had a home that stayed in place. We had people who showed up. We had each other. And for the first time in years, that was more than enough. Now, when I sit in this steady little home, with sunlight warming the floor and Mia's drawings brightening the walls, I'm reminded how far love can carry us. Losing my family's acceptance hurt, but it also taught me something simple and true. Real family is built from kindness, not from matching last names. No one should have to beg for a place to belong. Choosing a safer path for Mia and me wasn't easy, but it was the first time I felt truly free to start again. And this home, quiet and sturdy, feels like proof that we made the right choice. If this story resonates, share where you're watching from, and please like the video and subscribe for more stories like this.